Hi, I'm Donna from XOXSEW. In this video, I'll show you how to find your scant 1/4 inch seam and why it's important. Let's get started. When sewing two pieces of fabric together, the seam allowance is the area between the raw edges of your fabrics and the stitch line. The standard seam allowance for quilters is 1/4 inch. However, one of the most common issues quilters face is producing a block that's smaller than expected. A lot of times, the reason is that you lose a little bit of fabric after the seams are pressed and folded, just like you see here. A scant 1/4 inch seam allowance creates just a slightly narrower area. It accounts for that fabric loss when your seam is pressed. So how do you find your scant 1/4 inch seam allowance? Without any fancy tools, you can find it using the good old trial and error method by either adjusting the needle position of your sewing machine to the right or adjusting where you position your fabrics in relation to the sewing needle. Let me show you. First, make a test block to check your current seam allowance by cutting 3 pieces of fabric with the same dimensions. Mine are 2.5 inches by 5 inches. Then, sew them together along the long edges. I'm going to sew mine with a regular 1/4 inch seam allowance for this demonstration. Press your seams and measure the center strip, which should be 1/2 inch shorter now. My strip was 2.5 inches, so it should now be 2 inches. As you can see, the center strip is a bit smaller than 2 inches because the folds on those pressed seams ate up some of that fabric. Now we know that the seam allowance should be narrower to make up for that fabric loss. To do so, adjust the needle position just a little bit to the right. If your needle doesn't move on your machine, place a piece of blue tape closer to the needle, just a bit narrower than 1/4 inch, so you know where to place your fabrics, as this is where the raw edges of my fabrics will be aligned. I'm going to repeat the same steps with 3 new pieces of fabric measuring 2.5 inches by 5 inches. As you can see, I've created a seam that's narrower than 1/4 inch. After pressing the block, I need to check to see if the center strip is 2 inches now. Yep, I found my scant 1/4 inch. That means I'm going to make my blocks using the new needle position or using this edge as a guide to align the raw edges of my fabrics when sewing. It may take a couple more tries to find your scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, but it's worth it to make sure your blocks are sewn accurately. For comparison, here are the 2 blocks I made in this video. Notice how they don't line up properly because the block that used a regular 1/4 inch seam ended up being smaller than what it's supposed to be. That fabric loss can really affect your quilt project. Of course, there are also other factors that can affect your block accuracy, such as pressing your seams open rather to one side, which results in a flatter, more accurate seam, and even the type of fabrics matter since some are thicker than others. However, a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance is a great start for accurate quilt piecing. If you find this tutorial helpful, please subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for more videos and helpful sewing tips. Thanks for watching.